குக்கரி சேனலை பார்த்து யார் வேணாலும் சமையல் பண்ணலாம். ஆனா சுவையான சமையல் பண்றது எப்படி? நான் இதயம் நல்லெண்ணெயில சமையல் பண்றேன். ஆஹா ஓஹோன்னு பாராட்டுறாங்க. நீங்களும் இதயம் நல்லெண்ணெயில சமையல் பண்ணுங்க, பாராட்ட வாங்குங்க.
தினம் தோறும் வாங்குவே இதயம் இதயம்.
சாணக்யா இன்டர்நேஷனல் அகாடமி உங்களுக்குள் இருக்கும் தலைவரை வெளிக்கொண்டு வரும் பியூர் பாலிடிக்ஸ் பயிற்சி பட்டறை. நேரடி மற்றும் இணைய வழி. கான்டாக்ட் 7338824242.
Chancellor Ambassador Kamal Sibal, Vice Chancellor Professor Santishri Dhulipudi Pandit, Dean SIS Professor Amitabh Mattu, President Chintan Research Foundation Sri Shishir Priyadarshi, Excellencies, teachers, including my teachers, friends, students, colleagues. It's a great pleasure for me to join you all as we celebrate the School of International Studies turning 70 and holding the first Aravali Summit. In the course of introducing that, mention was made of the Parsati Rock. G. Parsati was, of course, the founding Vice Chancellor of this university. And I must share with you the privilege of being his special assistant when he was the de facto foreign minister, which proves that JNU knows how to look after its own. Now, I myself entered the roles of SIS in its 20th year. And so for me, this is a personal milestone of 50 years of association, 52 if I also count my MA courses which I did while studying in the School of Social Sciences. Now, I had the advantage, and thank you Amitabh for reading his piece about the institutional journey in the issue of the international studies that we just released. And I reflected on the good fortune of having the opportunity to interact with some of the founding stalwarts of the SIS. It was, however, the next generation that really taught me when I was doing my MA at SSS and then MPhil and PhD at the SIS. So let me genuflect to them all today on this occasion, and some of my teachers are present here. So, and also let me express my fond sentiments for the cohort of fellow students with whom, as is typical in JNU, I am still very much in touch. Now, my generation was witness to the physical shift of SIS from Feroja Road to the old JNU campus before it came here. And as many of you would know, the school was associated from the beginning with the Ministry of External Affairs and with the Indian Council of World Affairs, two institutions that I obviously know well in my professional life. Being in the same domain, it is also natural that I'm familiar, maybe more than familiar, with many generations of scholars and academics of SIS. In ministry and embassies abroad, we would renew our acquaintance regularly and exchange notes and views. So today, I speak to you not just as the foreign minister or even as an alumnus, but as someone with a deep and abiding connection to the School of International Studies. As I do, the thought crosses my mind whether studying international relations has actually helped me to practice it more adeptly. Now, certainly a PhD and MPhil that were on the impact of nuclear technology on diplomacy provided a foundation for some professional responsibilities. Early in the Ministry of External Affairs, I dealt with the issue of Tarapur fuel supply, and then in the fashioning of the first export control regime that we finalized in 1984. Thereafter, that foundation was useful when we negotiated the nuclear deal with the United States 2 decades later and engaged with the nuclear suppliers group. A very different dimension were the SIS courses that I undertook on Chinese and Soviet politics, which certainly made it so much easier to function when I worked in those societies. Looking back, perhaps the schooling in SIS also helped shape many other traits, including the inclination to engage and utilize the academic community and its platforms. And perhaps in a way I could blame my books on all of you. Now, the SIS started at a stage of our history when we began re-engaging the world after our independence. Since then, it has analyzed and interpreted global events while nation building advanced. A large portion of this period was when India confronted significant problems and adverse circumstances. Today, SIS must consider shifting gears and undertaking the task of addressing the agenda of Viksit Bharat. Now, this is no simple matter because it appears that it is India's destiny that its rise take place in an exceptionally turbulent era. When I look back at my research on the evolution of a global order in the aftermath of a world war, it seems almost glacial in comparison to the mega changes that we are witnessing today. Consider the global landscape now and let us reflect on the intensity of the transformation and its implications. A third of global manufacturing has moved to a single geography with attendant consequences for supply chains. There is rising anti-globalization sentiment in many societies. Trade calculations are being overturned by tariff volatility. The global energy scenario has changed profoundly, with the US becoming a major fossil fuel exporter and China a key renewable one. There are competing models on the harnessing of data and the evolution of artificial intelligence which jostle with each other. Big tech has become a significant player in itself. New routes of connectivity are emerging, some of them with a strategic purpose. The mobility debate seeks to reconcile skills, demand, and social reactions to them. The application of sanctions, the seizure of assets, the advent of crypto, they have all today changed the face of global finance. Competition for rare earths and critical minerals has become visceral, even as technology controls have further tightened. The quality of weaponry and the nature of war itself has been transformed, making it more standoff, more impactful, and definitely more risk-prone. Now, the strategic consequences of such deep change across a broad swath of human activity occurring in such a short time frame is surely very profound. We see an erosion in sovereignty facilitated by tech penetration and manipulation. Global rules and regimes are being revisited and at times even discarded. Cost is no longer the defining criteria for economic transactions. Ownership and security are equally so. End-to-end risks are rising, beginning with the concentration of production, moving through limited supply chains, and then to the dependence on key markets. Alliances and understandings are being reviewed and renegotiated. A belief in balance of power is being replaced with actions based on margins of power. Cumulatively, cumulatively, the world is witnessing more competition and less compacts. The needle has shifted towards an intersection of interests and away from the promise of cooperation. It is driven by the weaponization of everything, with less inhibition to use available tools. Now, all nations face these predicaments, but while a majority of them are struggling to cope or busy defending their interests, India has to strategize, and India has to continue rising amid such volatility. Friends, the challenge for analysts and practitioners alike is to accurately read this complex and evolving landscape. Only then can we figure out how best India can calculate and respond. Now, this is by no means a defensive stance. We have to safeguard our interests and yet continuously advance up the global hierarchy. We have to de-risk our exposures and engagements and yet take risks when necessary. We have to appreciate that interdependence is both a stabilizer and at the same time a vulnerability. And the world is all about being on the positive side of that ledger. From India's perspective, three driving forces of demand, of demographics, and of data will propel its rise. While this is naturally a domestic agenda, the foreign policy implications are to weigh the pros and cons of our choices. Not just that, indeed to maximize the freedom of choice itself. Along with that, we have to create the ideas, the concepts, the terminology, the explanations, and the narratives for the journey towards 2047. This is what awaits the SIS of the future. Now, every domain has its own truisms and fundamentals. Even as we look ahead, it is essential to appreciate the lessons of the past. And few are better placed to undertake that exercise than an SIS which is entering its 8th decade. Probably the most obvious of them is the importance of realism and the significance of national capabilities. Both were underestimated in the early decades after independence, with costs and consequences that we all know well. Our goodwill towards neighbors cannot presume that they necessarily reciprocate that sentiment. The value of territory and its strategic implications must never be taken lightly. The defense of our boundaries needs the requisite infrastructure, not just declarations of intent. If nations have permanent interests, then adjusting policy to global shifts must be accepted as a necessity. These learnings have been taken into account by policy formulation in the last decade. Now, allow me, in addition, to highlight 10 particular dimensions of change that we have also seen in the same period. 1, relationships need to be continuously tended, not episodically addressed. That is why we see a more intense diplomacy and a more high-profile one within the subcontinent itself and with the Gulf, ASEAN, Central Asia, and major powers. Some bilateral visits have actually taken place after decades, after a gap of decades. 2, in our own region, we have to ourselves underwrite the infrastructure for cooperation if it is to be proofed against political volatility. This is the essence of neighborhood first policy. India has to be the go-to option in any crisis for the entire subcontinent. 3, the maritime aspects of our interests and concerns must not be underestimated. It is not just past history, It continued till the first decade of this century. That is why we now have the Sagar and the Mahasagar outlook. 4. The strategic diminishing of India as a result of the partition has to be overcome, and it has to be done by reaching out to the extended neighborhoods. This explains the Act East, the Link West, the C5+1, and the Focus Africa initiatives. 5. Even as we optimize our positioning among major powers, the constituency of the developing world should be continuously cultivated. Therefore, India proposed the Voice of the Global South summits and undertook the Vaccine Maitri initiative. 6. As our economy grows, so too do our responsibilities and, in fact, the world's expectations of India. That is why we have emerged as a regular first responder and a reliable development partner with projects today in 78 nations across various continents. 7. Recognizing that we have forged strong partnerships with many nations without making any an exclusive one, our preferred method of expanding cooperation is and will be through agenda-based platforms. Therefore, the membership of the Quad, of the BRICS, of the SCO, of the I2U2, amongst others. 8. Re-engineering connectivity is today vital. Increasing our options through engagement in multiple directions is in progress. We can see that with the IMEC, the North-South Transport Corridor, the Trilateral Highway, the polar routes, among others. 9. A nation's profile is also judged by the power of its ideas. In recent years, we have initiated the International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, the Global Biofuel Alliance, the International Big Cat Alliance, etc. Or given a global thrust to yoga and wellness, to millets and nutrition, or to sustainable lifestyles. What may look ambitious today, like one sun, one world, one grid, could actually be a reality not that far away. And 10, overall, India must operate in a multipolar environment while itself preparing to emerge as a pole. That is why multi-alignment serves it well right now, and the goal of becoming a leading power is a natural one for the future. And preparations must commence now to create a global footprint, a task that probably will take 2 generations. No region is too far away anymore. No region is too far away anymore to engage for Indian diplomacy. And you can see that whether it is the Nordics or the FIPIC involving Pacific Islands, West Africa, CARICOM or CELAC. Friends, there is a strong and direct connection between the internal dynamics of any nation and its external manifestations. The concept of comprehensive national power has not only gained greater acceptance, but also serves as a key national security objective. Many of our preferences and initiatives are decided keeping it in mind. In engaging the world, it is also essential that we factor in the demands of the real economy and the views of the real society. This is not always the case in the past, where policy preferences were sometimes at odds with socio-economic sentiments of our society. Especially in this day and age, we cannot be impervious to public opinion. Developing and projecting our national personality on the world stage is also critical, as we occupy a more prominent place. After all, we are a civilizational state, and the quest for modernity and progress must be harmonized with our traditions and culture. So let me say this. The SIS has been in the forefront of developing India's diplomatic capabilities for 7 decades now. This has been both an intellectual endeavor as well as being a training ground. It has served as an inspiration for the proliferation of international relations studies in the rest of the country. Today, it must help shoulder the responsibility of preparing India to enter a higher orbit and emerging as a leading power. We need the concepts, the strategies, and the terminology to facilitate that journey. Auditing our performance and illustrating it with case studies is enormously helpful. How to debate within and how to disseminate beyond is a task that SIS must pursue vigorously. As India globalizes, public interest about the world will also grow commensurately. The power of analysis and of articulation must address that societal need as well. So, as we mark SIS at 70, let me conclude by emphasizing what a privilege it has been to be associated with this august institution. I have every confidence that it will grow from strength to strength and live up to the promise of its very distinguished history. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for that brilliant. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for that brilliant, inspirational speech. The Honorable Minister has agreed to take a few questions, and I would encourage students, sir, with your permission, to ask the first questions. Chetan in the back row.
Hello, sir. Good evening. Sir, since independence, Indian foreign policy has moved from a phase of hyphenation to dehyphenation with Pakistan. But some recent events suggest that some degree of rehyphenation. So how do you see it, and does it indicate a gap between our policy intent and diplomatic outcome?
Yeah, Chetan, you were going to ask a question. Some other Chetan intervened.
Thank you, Professor Mattu. Thank you, Minister, for your very insightful speech. I am Chetan Rana. I'm a final year PhD student working on foreign policy of populists. My question is, like you emphasized a lot on neighborhood in your speech, right? And you talked about how the world today is very complex, but India's neighborhood has been a challenge from times of Nehru to today, right? The nature or the forms of those challenges have changed, but it has been a challenge. So my two-part question is, one, how do you evaluate the success or failure of neighborhood first policy, considering the reality that neighborhood will always be a challenge? And B, can India rise while not being able to accommodate India's neighborhood properly?
I think I see Khushi there. Yeah, Khushi, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. My name is Khushi. I'm a PhD student at CPOR SIS. And sir, since there's a touch of reminiscence and nostalgia in the air today, could you share some JNU experiences with us and some learnings and experiences that have stayed with you through these years? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll respond to this. You want to take one more?
One more? Yes. Suhasini, you're here after a while, perhaps. Yeah, there was one more question. The gentleman in the blue shirt. Blue shirt.
There's a girl, young lady.
Young lady.
Yeah, get up, get up. Get up, yes.
Yes.
So, good evening, sir. Good evening, everyone. As we know that India's foreign policy has long projected strategic autonomy, and it has been able to manage multiple major powers, and it has served India's interests. It has also helped India to navigate into the complex multipolar world today. But at the same time, multiple scholars have criticized it to be as a sitting on the fence policy, which is which also highlights its indecisiveness. So in the context of India in 2047 becoming a developed economy, and also in the context of the ambition of India becoming one of the major global powers, I would like to ask whether strategic autonomy is actually aiding in that process, or is it actually limiting the decisive role that India can play today?
Sure. Okay. May I go with this? So, look, the first question about hyphenation. Now, we have multiple neighbors. Some are clearly better than others. And the hyphenation normally happens with a neighbor who's not so nice. Now, you have to understand, when we say de-hyphenation, that means it's our objective and our approach that decisions made by third countries about us are not made keeping that relationship as the lens or as the factor of calculation or factor of primary calculation. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they would accommodate us. I think you will always see attempts, to balance us off, or if there is a situation, to use that situation for their own ends. That is the competitive nature of international politics. From our perspective, the best way of de-hyphenation is frankly to outstrip the other party in terms of power and capability. And today, I can tell you as a person who travels, meets people, I've just come from a UN session, the kind of equivalence that I would hear when I joined the Foreign Service, when I left JNU and entered the Foreign Service in the 1970s, Ambassador Sybil would vouch for a decade before that. Nobody talks like that anymore, So I cannot wish away a difficult neighbor. That is a reality, however unpleasant it may be. But what I have to do is to make myself impactful enough and in a way attractive enough that the relationship is primarily one which is based on my own capabilities and my virtues and my contributions. And I think that is broadly happening. So the neighboring case will keep trying, in a way to intrude into that conversation and try to carve out a place for themselves. In a way, extrapolating on that for the neighborhood first. Look, neighborhood first, first of all, let me say one thing. If you ask any country in the world, including any big country, neighbors are always challenging because they are neighbors. That there will be, issues with neighbors which you will not have with countries who are one layer or more removed. So it's not as though India has problematic neighbors. Every country has problematic neighbors. Every big country has more problematic neighbors. Now, when you have a policy, the purpose of a policy is not to solve a problem. The purpose of a policy is to manage relationships to your national advantage. Now, the whole idea of neighborhood first was one, to give our neighbors a certain primacy, a certain priority of attention. Number two, by attention here means giving resources, giving a kind of a political energy, which was not there before neighborhood first came into being. If you look today with any of our neighbors, barring one, if you look today at the projects, look at the, energy grids, you look at the roads, the rail, the movement of people, it is actually the last decade has been transformational. Now, the thinking behind neighborhood first is, if you create enough of a basis for cooperation in which both parties have an interest, that then serves as a stabilizing factor. So even when you have change, even when you have a great disruption, there are countervailing stabilizing factors which address that. And I would argue that in many cases, the changes that we have seen in the last few years, the consequences would have been much sharper had actually this cooperative basis and the infrastructure mostly underwritten by India had not been there. And your point about accommodating neighbors, yes, we do try to accommodate neighbors. In fact, we do more than accommodate neighbors. If you look at the kind of support we extended to Sri Lanka during its economic crisis, or the kind of support we give even today to the Maldives, or what we did during COVID, or the kind of fuel and fertilizer supplies that we gave after the Ukraine conflict started. So we have gone, as my remarks I said, we need to become the go-to country because we are the largest. We are the common neighbor to the entire region. But that doesn't prove, it against other, interests that they may have, positions they may take. So we can accommodate them to the extent our national interest allows them to do so. Where our national interest requires otherwise, we have to deal with that as well. I'll come to the nostalgia bit later. On the strategic autonomy. Look, to rise, let me transpose that question. Imagine if you were not today adopting strategic autonomy. Please tell me which country in the world would you like to join up with and put your future in their hands? I can't think of anybody. If you can, I'd like to hear that. To me, my interest is best secured by actually maximizing my options, maintaining my freedom of choices, handling change by continuously, see, the pace of change that I tried to describe to all of you means you have to keep revising, keep refreshing, keep adjusting, keep recalculating. And you can't do that if you're tied to somebody else. You can do that when you are fundamentally a master of your own destiny. So I would argue that the more volatile the world is, the more turbulent it is, the more unpredictable it is as the global order, the old global order unravels. The case for multi-alignment or strategic autonomy, which is part of multi-alignment, actually becomes stronger, not weaker. And this idea that sitting on the fence, the very use of that phrase, talks as though the land doesn't belong to you. That you get off the fence, you're sitting on somebody else's land. So at some stage, we've got to carve out territory or space for ourselves. And then say, okay, I've taken a stand. Maybe a time will come when others will wonder whether they should be aligning with us or not. So my point is, a lot of these arguments that, freedom of choice is equated with indecision, which is a clever subtext for saying align with me. I think we should call it out. We should say that, look, that's not the way I consider. When we were much weaker, we didn't do it. There is today no case to do it. In fact, when I look at the current trends in global international politics, I would argue that the behavior of states, some of which Ambassador Sibal also referred to, has actually made a stronger case for maintaining strategic autonomy and promoting multi-alignment. The question about nostalgia, look, nostalgia takes many forms. I remember friends, some of whom are here, some of whom are not here, some of whom are not anymore with us. For me, in fact, this was not just a university I studied. I got married to a fellow JNU student. So I remember my teachers, some of whom are sitting here. I'm sure everybody at a university stage goes through that phase. I'd just like to believe JNU was more intense and somehow more special.
Just time for one more round. I have three more questions, but we'll have to limit it to, with your permission, students, because press gets a chance to interact with you on a daily routine basis. So we'll just limit it to students and. So at the moment, ma'am,
Okay, students, anybody? There are 3 hands behind. Yeah, girls, get up first. So there are no boys.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello, sir. Me, PhD scholar at the Center for African Studies. Question is that India's engagement is extending beyond its traditional setup. Like we are also going to engaging with West Africa. So in this scenario, my question is, though India has been engaging, and the Honorable Prime Minister has also been engaging with a lot of African countries, but there's been a lot of individualistic engagement rather than seeing a very holistic engagement. And also, somewhere the last India-Africa Forum Summit also happened in 2015. So in these lines, and keeping in mind the title and of the conference, how do you see the engagement moving forward? Thank you, sir.
The 2 boys. Yes. The boys will have the last word.
Hello, sir. My question is on strategic technologies. What should be India's approach when the true great powers are fighting for critical and emerging technologies, especially in an age where there has been a rapid disruptions in terms of semiconductors, AI, and future of quantum technologies? So what should be India's strategic technology doctrine must be in that sense? Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Mansur Kumar, a PhD scholar at Center for Asian and Central Asian Studies. So I'd like to ask one interrelated question on strategic autonomy. So in your one of the last points, you mentioned about comprehensive national power. So looking at this point, I think the world would be little bipolar, with China and the US sitting much above all other powers combined together. And the question is our foreign policy really independent, or are we confusing eroticism with independence? Because even during the Cold War, when we talked about non-alignment, we were sort of tilted toward the Soviet Union, because we had at point criticized the US for its deal in Korea and Vietnam, but we remained largely silent on Czechoslovakia or Hungary invasion. So my another question is, owing to the recent...
One question. In fact, you already asked 2. So let me, one on Africa, I'm glad you brought it up, because again, look, I mentioned that it's important for us today to expand and deepen our footprint. And what that means today is, one part of that is having more embassies, particularly in regions where perhaps we don't have that historical familiarity that we did. In the case of Africa, actually, in the last 10 years, we took a decision to open 18 new embassies. I think we've done 14 or 15 of them. And we would today be among the countries which have the largest number of embassies today in Africa. A large part of our development partnership projects are also with African partners. Now, the nature of that is changing. A decade ago, we were doing more bricks and mortars, hard infrastructure projects. I think today we are shifting to what is much more capacity enhancement. And it's an interesting point that, when we decided that we would encourage IITs to go out, the first IIT which actually went out of this country went out to Africa. It was established in Zanzibar for students of Africa. Now, in the case of IAFS, you are right, the last IAFS took place in 2015. We wanted to do one in 2020. We had planned everything. Unfortunately, the COVID came. Now, after the COVID, there's been a bit of a debate on the African side, whether they should do it in the full format of all 54, or whether they should do a troika, or whether, there should be something in between. So it's being sorted out. I am reasonably hopeful that probably within the next year we will see the next India-Africa summit. On the strategic technologies, look, industrially, economically, for us, the 70s and 80s were in some ways lost decades. That particularly if you compare what China was doing at that time, 80s, and compare it to what was happening in India. And bear in mind, until the 80s, in terms of size of economy, we were about the same. So we today have two challenges. One is to play catch up on industry and manufacturing to compensate for what we could not do in the past, which we will, some of it is possible, some of it may not be that easy to do. But doing that doesn't mean you take your eyes off the ball where the new domains are coming up, because then you'll perpetually remain behind the curve, you'll remain backward. So we have, at one level, you can see the kind of logistics, the infrastructure which industry needs, the industrial parks that you need, the orthodox industry and engineering that this country required, not now, but many decades ago. But at the same time, there is a high degree of focus today on semiconductors, on electric mobility, on renewables, on space, on drones. So you're trying actually to move into that space even as you are. It's like doing yesterday's homework but also preparing for tomorrow's exam. So that's really the kind of mindset which today is driving our thought process. And